Well, I haven't whined about my disability for a while, so I guess that's what we're doing today. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about something that is not books, not even book adjacent, or sort of, maybe, we will see. And that is me, my disability, and stuff like that. So, as a quick warning, yes, this will be about disability, probably the mental health costs of having a disability, and so forth. So if you don't want to hear about that, that's totally fine. Do something else instead. Do something that is fun, and watch a video about books or something. There are enough out there, so don't worry. I just wanted to keep that out of the way. And with that, let's talk about me and all my problems for a while. Alright, so here's the thing. I recently went to a conference and it was brilliant and I had a lot of fun there. It was all great. And then I came back home and I was completely knocked out for a bunch of days because it's tiring for me to go to social events. And don't worry, I know social events are tiring for a lot of people. I just thought about it a while and I've come up with some ideas and stuff that I want to talk about today. So going to social events, having social interactions is extremely stressful for me. And oftentimes at least. And when I think about it, one of the reasons is, and I've talked to people about that, and people are always like, yeah, but you're so cool, and you're doing all these things, and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, I am. And that's kind of why it is so incredibly tiring and stressful for me. Because when I'm in groups with people, I'm always running on like 150%. I'm always trying to be there, staying up the longest, doing the most, talking the most, doing more than, than I would normally do. I'm always on 150%. And I was wondering why that is the case. And I think up to a point that has to do with my disability. In this case, obviously, me being blind. It's one of those disabilities that you can't, or handicaps that you can't really hide that well. So it's a visible one. It's a physical one that is very visible, unless, unlike, for example, diabetes, which is obviously also a disability, but one that people don't necessarily see at the first moment. And there's a lot of those, but mine, in this case, is a very visible one. And that means that people I interact with are aware of that. And I'm aware of the fact that they are aware of it, and so forth. And that leads to a lot of problems I've talked about it before, but I think that's sort of why I do always overcompensate by being more and trying to be larger than I am. You know what I mean? And the question is, of course, why? And, I guess at the core of it is like, I want to be liked. I want to be part of the group. I want to be normal. And that's a terrible word. And that's kind of what it boils down to. Because we often say we just want to be normal. We just want to be regular people. And there's something fundamentally wrong with these words. Because what they imply is that not being normal, not being regular, it means that you somehow are wrong. See, normal has like a very objective definition, but it also has that more like moral implication of being abnormal, which means wrong, not doing the right thing, not being the right person, not being the right body, whatever. And that's kind of at the core of that. And the problem with that is, of course, that, there's no normal way of being. There's no regular way of being. That just doesn't exist because we're all, unique in all kinds of ways. And, that's, that's just how it is. However, we built that up in our heads. And that leads to people trying extra hard to be that kind of person, to be normal and doing more than is necessary. Because on the other hand, we always feel that if we're not accepted by, or at least in my case, and we'll come to the internalized ableism here, and that's kind of the point. It's like, if people don't accept me, if I'm seen as that person with a disability, that, well, to use, not to find a point of word, that cripple, so to speak, right? I've lost. And that's kind of the systematic aspect here that we'll come back to in a minute. at the heart of it all is a form of internalized ableism, because I want to be seen as not disabled, which is very different from being seen as someone with a disability, but just one of the gang. And it's very difficult to achieve that because there's a lack of trust, because people can tell me whatever they want. I'll always believe that whatever they do has this unspoken for a blind person behind it. And that's where the internalized ableism comes in. I've been like part of my school, I was at a school for visually impaired and blind students, and there's a lot of ableism going on in these kind of schools. Like the visually impaired people look down on the fully blind people, and so forth, and all of that is this hierarchy of wanting to be as close as possible to normal, which, as we already said, does not exist. And it's very difficult to get rid of that, to not internalize that idea, to wanting to be better than these other people, looking down on these other people. And there's a systemic reason for why we are talking and thinking like that, which obviously means is connected to the fact that in our society under capitalism, we do kind of measure the worth of people, and the worth of people is already an incredibly toxic way of talking about it, like a dehumanizing way of talking about it. But we kind of measure the worth of people by their capabilities to, live a productive life in our society, having full-on jobs and so forth. And obviously that's fucked up. But it's something that has been, drilled into a lot of people over decades, almost, over centuries at this point. And it's still there. So being as close as possible to that fully capable human being, so to speak, under capitalism, is seen as being better than someone who is not, and not as being seen as different. And that's kind of where that ableism gets internalized over time. And you want to be, like for school kids, like it was seen as like a huge thing to have friends that are just, have no disabilities. That was seen as a huge bonus. Whereas, in those very specific high school hierarchies, hanging out with the fully blind people was seen as very much a bad thing for people that had, less of a visual impairment than fully blind people. It's ridiculous. It's fucked up, but it kind of shows how these hierarchies, these social hierarchies, are kind of built in, and that's kind of what I want to examine today, because I think there's something to that needs to be examined in a lot of ways. Now we can hopefully all agree that, thinking that it's better to have friends without disability is better than, having friends with disabilities is fucked up. And here's the interesting thing. When you grow up, and I assume most of you out there will say the same things, like, no, I will never judge someone for that, and so forth. And I believe that. See, that's kind of the problem, right? Most people are not, openly discriminating against other people. Most people will try to not be, at least when they're talking about individuals, most people don't see themselves as ableist or as racist or as sexist. Well, some do, and it's certainly a problem, but there's that other thing. And that's where I think where the term marginalization does more service than the term discrimination in a lot of ways, because we still push people to the side. We marginalize them. We push them to the margins. We might not actively do anything against these people, but we also don't do anything to include them, to actively include them. And that's where that feeling of worth kind of comes in, because you notice, or I notice, like I feel a lot of people, we notice when we're pushed to the side. We notice when we don't get the calls. It's the same thing that you see, like, being the overweight kid that always gets selected last for games or for sports at school, right? We notice when people kind of look over us, pass over us, and just ignore us and push us to the side, and we then start thinking, like, why is that? And we then try harder to be included, because we're social animals in a way, right? But for those people, for those of us who are sort of on the margins, it takes way more time and energy to do that, right? We need to do more to be seen as worthy of as worthwhile, as worthy of, you know, inclusion in a way. And I think that's like the where that comes from, where a lot of that cost comes from, because once again, it's not something that we do on purpose. It's not something that we do consciously, right? It's very much a function of how our society is built, and how over the last, say, 250 years, we have very much tied most of our worth and self-worth and public worth and so forth to our ability to make a lot of money, to partake in very specific aspects of our society and of capitalism. It's just how these things are these days, and no one individually is able to to stop capitalism on our own, right? And it's important to see that there is a systematic thing going on, a systemic thing going on. But, and I think that's sort of where I want to go with this today, we also do have the individual cost for all of that. It's the system shows each individual of us how we are maybe not seen as, you know, equal to anyone else, and not as worthwhile as everyone else. So we try harder. Those are individual costs. But the system is the thing that is exacting that cost. And I think that's where a lot of this internalized ableism comes from. Now, I certainly have always had this problem. Like, I've internalized my ableism real hard. All I want to do is like try to not be seen as the person with a disability, to not be judged by that, to not be that person. It's deeply rooted in whatever I do. It's something that's caused me a lot of harm when, you know, you do all kinds of terribly dumb things, are not careful, try to prove to everyone else that you're just as fast, as strong, as smart, as whatever as everyone else, or maybe a bit more, because you got to prove this doubly hard. And this is kind of where the next part from comes in, which is systemic approaches to overcoming that. I'm talking about quota, and obviously this is something that goes for race, ethnicity, gender, all kinds of quota. The problem with that is that we need them desperately, because our systems otherwise will marginalize these groups further and exclude them from jobs, society, in all kinds of ways. But knowing that you're in there because these quotas exist, always has this like, but am I good enough? And, you know, there's always, you know, the sexist, racist, ableist word is like, oh, they just got this job because they are, well, person of color, woman, disabled, whatever. But, you know, we feel that we have that question as well. And while we need this at the moment, before we have like a fully inclusive society and we don't need these quotas anymore, which is far from where we are now, it still costs, and it costs at the end of the day us more than those people who are not part of that minority, that marginalized group. It costs them less. Yes, you can go like, oh, they got the job, not me, because they have this. But we will have to live with that skepticism every single fucking day of our lives. Wherever we go, whether there is a quota or not, we'll always ask ourselves, did I get this because I'm good enough for this? Or did I get this because someone else thought they had to give it to the person, to the marginalized group? And that's fucking terrifying, and it's stressful, and it's painful, because it's see, over years and years living in those kind of systems, where you are marginalized, you build up that thing, and it's the pain adds up, and it leads to a point where it's very, very difficult to trust yourself, to trust, in this case, myself, that if I achieve something, I can't fully, you know, I don't want to say enjoy it, but it's like, I can't even fully accept anything that I gain, because always I'm wondering, it's like, is this because someone gave it to me out of charity, or they thought that they needed to do something, and that's fucked up, because it's very much not helpful with mental health if everything you achieve you put in question because you imagine that it was just because someone else wanted to do a good thing. Now the problem is, what alternatives do we have? And I think that's like the unfortunate thing. There is very little I will know how to do with this at the end of the video, because see, if I or if we as marginalized people don't fight, there's always the idea of going back to our group, our small group, so to speak. I can hang out with people with that are blind, with people that have visual, disabilities. I know I have friends in those groups, of course, and it's very easy and comforting in a lot of ways to just hang out with these people, because you don't have to do all the extra fighting, the extra work. You don't have to put in the extra, energy. But then again, you'll just like live in a parallel society. You'll just, have no contact to the rest of the world. And the question is like, do you want that? Or do I want that? And I obviously don't want that, because, there's a whole fucking world out there. I don't want to just sit at home and be comfortable with like 5 other people that have the same issue as me, and we'll just like talk in circles on like how mean the world is. That's not what I want. I want to change the world. And that's the big problem at the core of it, I guess. Because see, the other part is, of course, inclusion, being just a normally accepted part of society. And the problem there is, of course, we can't have that under the form of capitalism that we're running these days. In a system that is built on exploiting every single person as much as possible and valuing them accordingly to their potential to be exploited, which is how capitalism works, right? People that can't be exploited that much will never be seen as equals. It's just the heart of it. And overcoming that is incredibly complicated, because we need to do this all together. But for that, we first need to have your respect and your acceptance as just equals. And that's kind of where things become very difficult, because obviously there is inclusion and there is, quotas and so forth that I already spoke about, and they are necessary and they're good, because that's the only way to kind of force society into a more equal situation. But it's important to understand that that comes at a very specific personal and mental cost. And that's kind of where this all started and where this is going, which is like, what can I as an individual do? And I guess the part is, owning it. There's this thing like, you own this, like, yeah, I am blind. But it's, once again, this question like, how do you do that without making everything you do just about the disability, just about your chronic illness? Because that means you've given control of your entire existence up to something that you had no choice over. And most of us don't want that, because it's basically losing control or giving up a form of agency. On the other hand, I guess, if we have the strength, if I have the strength, the energy, then I should own it and go out and be, I don't know, I don't want to use the word proud or pride here, because, it's a complicated word with a lot of baggage these days. That's basically what it boils down to, up to a point. It's like, yeah, I need to be open about this. I need to put it out there, because it's better than just hiding it and going like, hopefully no one notices that and hopefully people accept me. Sometimes you just want to, be very angrily about that. And that's kind of where this whole thing ends, which is me trying to come to terms with these things, with myself, with the fact that I've obviously internalized a shitload of ableism and self-hatred over the years, over the decades at this point. And trying to figure out how to do better, where to go with this, and how to do it. And I think maybe just talking about it openly will maybe open some people's eyes, so to speak, to what people that are different, and a lot of you probably also are different in all kinds of ways, mental health issues, all kinds of these aspects. Maybe we recognize that, and maybe the recognition that there is a cost to not having someone crack like really bad, negative, racist, sexist, ableist jokes at you, or, actively hating you, or despising us for being different. But just because we're not seen as having the same worth as other people, because we can't be as much exploited as other people under capitalism. I think that's maybe that recognition can already start some process of getting better at these things, realizing these things, is probably the first step. I don't know if I'm able to take the second step, because once again, talking to people is hard, and overdoing it is something I tend to do until I completely collapse, and then just nothing goes for a while, and that's not that's not a healthy way to live. So I don't know where to go with this. I just wanted to talk about it because it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and maybe it helps. Maybe some people gain some insight, and then we can all try to be better people and make this a better world. On the way to abolishing capitalism, which is still the end goal. Let me be clear about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, or it made you think. If so, let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll have a bit of a discussion. And as always, if you have questions about my disability as well as anything else, just, hit me up down there in the comments. If there's something you'd rather not talk openly about, there is obviously there is an email address. You can just write me an email. We can do all these things. We can figure it out. I'm almost optimistic. So yeah, have a great day, and I'll talk to you about books again very soon. Thanks, and cheers.